So let's start discussing the future, because we're drawing near the end of these panel discussions. We've heard quite a lot since this morning, so we want to open up to an outlook. So with you, Stephen Cury.
Not so far away. Talking about Dora's statement, maybe we could come back to it and remind us, of course, what it is we know more or less, but maybe talk more about it now, what is becoming, how many countries are signing it, and how many don't want to. This is also part of the discussion. Okay, let's make a point about it, please.
Okay, let me just give you a little update. So Dora, hopefully is well known, is a declaration that is trying to bring best practice in research assessment to the academy, to the research ecosystem. As a declaration, it's often thought of rather negatively, and it's often assumed that Dora is only about banning the misuse of the impact factor in research assessment, and that is certainly prominent in the declaration. But in fact, the text as a whole actually has quite a number of positive recommendations, and so we very much want to put the accent on thinking about what is good quality research. How do we develop more robust systems of research assessment that don't rely too simplistically on aggregate metrics, particularly the general impact factor, which has got many different problems associated with it that we probably don't have time today to investigate, but also and so we're trying to think of new approaches to research assessment. So we are trying to articulate a much more positive vision, and there are many stakeholders who are very interested and who are eager to collaborate with. So behind the declaration is a small organization that really took off in about 2017. So we do have a small amount of funding, and we have two members of staff, and we are expanding our reach around the world. So currently we have over 18,000 individuals have signed, and 2,500 organizations from many different parts of the world. But I can't give you the exact numbers in every single country, but just to give an idea. So in France, 64 organizations have signed. Now those could be universities, research institutes, funders, but also publishers or journals. By comparison, in the United Kingdom, where I'm sitting, there are 235 organizations have signed. In the United States, 150. In Ukraine, there are 10 organizations that have signed. In Germany, 50. In Italy, 26. So there is a variable uptake, but we do have uptake all around the world. In Argentina, 215 organizations. In India, 47. But so you see it's rather patchy and rather variable, but we are very much aware of needing to be an international organization, because the problem of doing research assessment well is a problem that every researcher in every country solves. And we know that research and scholarship are intrinsically very international activities. And so there's no point trying to solve it in one country or even in one continent. We really have to take a world view. But we have seen a big increase in the interest in Dora worldwide over the past 5 years. And we see more and more that Dora is mentioned in policy documents, and that the principles are now being enshrined in the policies of funders and of universities.
Also outside Europe, which is very important, as you mentioned, like United States, but also India. And Ukraine, as you just said. Well, thank you, Stefan. Of course, you stay with us, and you raise your hand or you shout every time you want to speak, okay? You'll be with us. Okay, Kostas, Gilnos, vous connaissez sans doute ces données que viennent...
Kostas, Gilnos, you probably knew the data that Stephen has shared with us. So it's going pretty well. He seems to be saying that things are moving in the right direction, that more and more countries and stakeholders are signatories. You've worked on several aspects related to Dora, and Dora was a basis for your work. Yes, Dora was a basis indeed, but at a European level, even though our initiative is open to everyone beyond Europe, in Europe, it is put to the forefront in a sort of structural manner. And that's connected with the ESG that you discussed this morning, European standards and guidelines. We try to see how the principles that we've put forward or that we are putting forward could be made operational and implemented. And it's not easy because it varies from one field to another. It varies from because of the culture of different countries, and depending on the age and the stage in the career of researchers. So to that end, we've decided together with our partners, for example, Lidia, to set up an initiative that is stakeholder driven, not by funders or public authorities, but with the participation of all stakeholders, such as universities, research evaluation institutes, research financing partners. So an initiative to get organized, put forward a number of principles and find a way to implement these principles. It's quite a lot of you then already, about 300. Well, yeah, that's a lot, but you started early. Yes, please go ahead. Well, I could go on for 30 minutes. Well, maybe not for 30 minutes, but give us the main components. Well, I'll let Lidia talk more about the initiative. But you asked us about the challenges that we've run into. Well, there are several challenges that we have to rise to, operational and sort of more substantial challenges. In terms of substantial challenges, definition of quality. You've discussed it before. What do we mean by quality? I don't know, but we have to agree. And of course, the answer will vary for one discipline or one field to another, or because of local culture. And is it universal for the same field of knowledge, or will it vary from one country to another, or in Europe compared to other continents? So those are questions we need to find an answer to. Well, what is certain is that we can't decide that quality will be measured by one or two indicators that will not be representative of the intrinsic quality of research products. And another thing that we're pretty certain about is that we have to include all research products, not only publications, but softwares, data, and etc. And we also have to factor in the behavior of researchers, what they contribute, their integrity, for example. Yes, we'll talk about that with Deborah. And how research has changed. So we always talk about collaborative research and sharing, but how do we reward these behaviors? It's a question also for the four former panelists. Should we reward that sharing compared to people who are only driven by competition? Well, those are real questions. Lidia, you're the Secretary-General of Science Europe, and you're very close to the work that Kostas has just mentioned. Would you say that currently research evaluation is undergoing a crisis, or is the word a bit too strong? Because all of you, since this morning, have been saying that things have changed compared to 50 years ago. There used to be those very traditional methods. There were indicators back then, and everything has changed. I wouldn't say that research evaluation is in a crisis, but there is a need for reform, yes. Which is why we heard about a number of initiatives. Some have been presented today and others in Europe and outside of Europe. So yes, there is a crisis in evaluation systems. And it's linked to changes and natural changes in science and why we make science and why science and how science contributes to our society. And alongside this initiative that the European Commission has invited us to join and to participate in very actively, alongside that, we develop a system of values in research. We try to kickstart that reflection. How should we change based on an in-depth reflection on which values for research today? And what are these values? And how these values could inform our development of new systems. Because we don't want to exit a too quantitative system, let's simplify things a bit, to another quantitative system. We don't want to replace a series of indicators with another series of indicators that will be as reductive. So it would be bringing closer quantitative and qualitative. So without shifting completely, there's a balance to be struck, I guess. Yes, it is a balance to be struck. We don't know what this balance is going to be, but what we know is that before starting to think of what this balance will be, we have to think of what we want to promote. We've said that we are currently diversifying the products of research. Well, this will probably be further diversified. So we're changing in the evolution of flexible systems that can adapt to the changes in science, and systems that can promote what is currently hidden or not sufficiently acknowledged in research. So there's work to be done to specify that, and also about societal challenges that we've mentioned before. Let me turn to Déborah Chery, because integrity is, of course, part of the concepts you want to put forward. Déborah Chery, you represent here researchers, young researchers in particular. So my question, since we discussed that working group on scientific integrity, and that working group that you're a part of, yes. Well, to tell you a bit more about this Eurodoc working group, Eurodoc brings together about 28 associations all across Europe. And in the beginning, the group tackled only scientific integrity, and we realized that we had to associate evaluation, because it is important to ask yourselves question. We don't spend all our time asking ourselves questions, but it is important to ask ourselves questions to gauge what the relevance of this is. Scientific integrity does not have an international definition. It's a bit like open science. There's no consensus on what we put behind those words. But to pick up on the question of open science and scientific integrity, what we want to put forward is more in the shape of recommendations. Eurodoc is about young researchers, and if we're part of an association all around Europe, about 28, can estimate about 1 million people, but it varies. 1 million of young researchers. If you're working on a PhD, or if you already have your doctorate. And we don't care really about the age, because practically speaking, you can be 45 and be working on a PhD thesis. I know someone who's 52 and who's working on a PhD. So integrity in terms of recommendation, what we're interested in is how we could evaluate the effect of peers. What is the impact? We know that peers guide us, but what is a possible scale to evaluate that? How could they guide us? You insist on this. You insist on being guided and evaluated by your peers. Well, yes, but it's not going to be anything resembling micromanagement, but we'd like someone to support us, to guide us. It's not mentoring either, but we need someone to guide us. We don't know what to propose, really, because we are left to our own devices at the moment. It's difficult to get a permanent contract. There's a lot of fixed-term contracts for young researchers, and that's true everywhere in Europe. I'm based in Paris, but it's something we've observed pretty much everywhere in Europe. We've conducted a study, and every year we conduct a study, and there are 6 different regions. Of course, the questions are about open science, but they reflect the situation globally. And questions will depend, referring to what a fellow student was saying about connectivity in open science. Someone in a group will say, I'd rather use Facebook Meta rather than Twitter, probably because of connectivity issues. And every year we conduct that kind of study. Is there a link with scientific integrity? Well, we could ask the question. And someone needs to help us make those connections. Because, of course, there's a consequence. When we apply for a job, tomorrow, so we need help in terms of supervision. You've engaged in long processes because working towards the doctorate takes a lot of time and energy. Let's have a dialogue between you. What kind of help or answer would you give to what Déborah Chery has just said? Well, what I would say is that there's a fundamental role to be played by research institutes as operators and financiers of research and also of quality assurance agencies. I think we need to support young researchers so that they can find the place in research. I'm aware, I used to work in the European University Alliance. I know that there are universities that organize dedicated seminars so as to support doctoral students in the process that will lead them to their degree and beyond, and help them network with people outside of the research institution to look for job opportunities after they have their doctorate. And national or international finances have more or less individualized programs, but it's true that there's work to be done more or less in depth to help you find your place in research. And that's not only in academia, in society as a whole, in all sectors. Just a quick word, Déborah Chery, before I give the floor to Stephen Cury. You asked questions about open science and that Kostas mentioned, and you wondered what role Dora played. Well, a number of institutions moved towards Dora and support Dora and were delighted, but maybe I'm saying a bit too much or going a bit too far saying we're delighted. We've supported that system, but on a personal note, I'm delighted, but it's mixed feelings because Eurodoc supported Dora, but the more I read in the literature, there's more and more about open science, and we can observe that there are mixed views. So I would have an open question about evaluation of open science. It needs to be evaluated because it looks like there might be 2 ways. Some people are very enthusiastic about open science, and others who are not in favor of open diamond, for example. So it begs the question, why? And maybe, and that's not the only point regarding open science. At Eurodoc, we have a president who is the representative of the recommendations of UNESCO. So Dora, it's great that there are more and more institutions joining. Just a quick word before I forget about the financing of agencies, that it is connected. As Kostas said, it generates pressure, it generates a number of things. And this morning it was said there are not only articles, there are patents and innovation. And what do we put behind innovation?
Est-ce que on en tient compte dans le statement, puisque vous dites que vous êtes majoritairement quand même les jeunes chercheurs?
Right. I just want to ask Stephen Cury what he thinks about that, because you said young researchers are all in favor of Dora. So Stephen Cury, perhaps you could.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond briefly to a couple of the points that Deborah made. I mean, she talked about precarity and the need for good careers advice for early career researchers, and I think that is absolutely fundamental. I know many PhD students and postdocs do feel very acutely the short-term nature of their contracts, and that's actually why it's very important that things like good mentorship are built into researcher assessment processes. I think one of the problems that we're trying to address, a part of the crisis that Lidia refers to, is the fact that we focus too much on products, on things like the papers that people publish or the grants that they win. And we lose sight, I think, of the people and the impact that a very competitive culture has on individual people. And that's one of the issues around our research culture, which has many toxic elements. There are most people working in research know stories about bad cases of bullying that happen within research groups because they're largely because of the hyper-competitive nature. We know that many women researchers face sexual misconduct within the academy and in society as large. And so there has to be a focus and a realignment, I think, in terms of incentives around the way that research is done and the quality of mentorship and training and support that PIs and supervisors offer should very much be placed more centrally at it. In terms of, early career researchers are in favor of Dora, and certainly I've certainly heard a lot of enthusiasm, and early career researchers are the future. It's not people like me. And I sense also, I'm interested in Deborah's comments, I sense also many early career researchers are very comfortable with the idea of open science because they've grown up with the internet and the idea that information should be free. And I think there are good arguments that, a more open approach to science in terms of publication. I'm in favor of preprints as a way of accelerating the sharing and the productivity of research in the same way that one shares data. There are questions around equity globally because there is a business model around open access that seems to favor rich countries, particularly if it's based on the payment of article processing charges. But actually, to my mind, developing diamond publication systems, which are basically funded centrally, so there's no charge to the reader or to the researcher, the author, is a model that actually comes to us, is well developed in South America, for example, where it is very equitable, very cost efficient. And I think there are lessons that we could learn in Europe and North America, for example, around doing that. But very interested to hear, to have more dialogue, because I'm absolutely convinced, and again, as Kostas said, it's really important that we involve stakeholders and all stakeholders in developing the reform process.
Okay, I hope you could see Déborah Chery. She's smiling at your answer. Kostas, Gilnos, que peut-on ajouter dans cette
So Kostas, Gilnos, what can we add in this exchange? Yes, I fully agree with what Stephen said. In addition, I would like to say that I am very happy because it's not often that I'm in a position to reconcile young researchers with what, that today for many positions in Europe, to have 2, 3, or 4 publications, articles published in a very prestigious journal can make or break a career. That's an issue, whether you publish or not, that can make or break a career. And So if a person is committed to a prestigious institution, they are told, oh, you absolutely have to publish. But in fact, you need to focus more on being a good researcher, fitting well into society, into a team, and having good behavior. It's very important to focus on that. So what are we recommending and advising our young researchers to do? So we don't really know today. It's very difficult. Our values very often are contrary to the short-term interest, not to the media, not to the interest in the medium term or in the longer term. But sometimes our values are contrary to the short-term interest, even of the young people themselves. That is why we have to commit to reform, and we have to do this as fast as possible. What Deborah said, earlier, we are looking for means to do this. How can we also involve young people in this reform process? Of course, involving universities. Well, universities, of course, the university presidents, rectors, and so on will be involved. But how do we involve young people, young researchers? And also these young people are working a lot, so they don't necessarily have time to reflect on these issues. They might have time later on. So we have to think about how we involve them, how we get them involved in the way their careers develop. And this is what we are doing with the coalition. We are ensuring that organizations of young researchers are involved. Another point, perhaps, Lydia, to just reflect further on this is to think on a broader level. Of course, there is the national level, but the national level, the national scope is no longer enough. And that's what we've been talking about all day. Yes, quite clearly. The evolution of the research evaluation system is it's not one region, one country, or one discipline of science that can do that. We really believe that this is a collective approach for the scientific community as a whole. And the scientific community as a whole has to agree on fundamental principles while allowing the necessary flexibility to allow a certain discipline. Again, I don't like the word discipline so much because discipline is often not quite clear what we mean, whether we're undertaking multidisciplinary research, transdisciplinary research. So we have to be careful as well. What I need to say as well, referring to what was said by the previous speaker, this reform is not only about open science. It's a reform for science as a whole, generally speaking. Open science is a movement within science, and there are others. And we, in particular, we are in favor of this because we are an association that represents published research institutions, and we believe that open science is the very best way to share science with everyone, and that science is a right, and science has to be accessible to all, and we believe this. However, it's not science, open science, that leads us to reflect on the evaluation system. It is, in fact, science as a whole. Science as a whole requires an evolution, a development, and a change of our evaluation system. You were talking earlier about articles published in major reviews that can make a career, for example. I believe that's still true today. But I believe you agree as well that there are many other ways of communicating. It can go all the way to marketing of scientific work. How do you achieve a balance, an equilibrium? There are many different ways of communicating results. So how do we keep a balance on, with integrity? Because of course, Déborah Chery, your association is very focused on the issue of integrity. Because we realize nowadays that there is a risk involved in these new directions we're taking. We need to measure the risks and control them. We need to both encourage and control, or it's a little bit difficult. But above all, though, we need to focus on peer evaluation. Peer evaluation, that is the best evidence of the quality of a scientist. In addition, there are several practices today there are several practices that allow a more open evaluation by peers. So there is almost like a public scientific discussion. I'm talking about dissemination as well. There are platforms today that exist. So in the public process, there is an implied evaluation of quality, because you can see if there is a quality of scientific assessment or not. Sorry, I'm maybe just pushing this idea too much, but do you feel that we persist in valuing only these traditional results, you know, articles published and things like that, and we're not open enough to other methods of evaluation? Well, it depends. It depends on countries, it depends on institutions, it depends on the autonomy of institutions, it depends on national legislation. Some countries have made more progress in this area than others. Some countries are more open than others in this regard. So focusing on Europe, there is no uniform approach really from one country to another. So what we're trying to do now is to find something that is essentially uniform, or to put it another way, uniform in essence, so that we can move it, for those who are most traditional in their approach, maybe move towards new directions and make the best use of the experience and the lessons learned by those who have made progress. So, you know, it's difficult from the outset to do it. Some countries, of course, are really familiar with these new approaches, and others are learning about them. Yes, Kostas, just to give you a more specific example related to the pandemic, there are researchers, even in France, I know of many researchers who did not want to share the genome data of regarding the virus during the pandemic. They didn't want to exchange it because they said, what's in it for me? You know, what's in it for me? Let me keep it for myself. Let me keep this information to myself, because it's a competitive system. You know, the public good or the public interest, the interest of the public would be to share that, but they didn't want to. And but alongside that, there is a study, Wellcome Trust, that did over the first 5 months, I think, of the pandemic. And this study found that regarding the work on COVID, the percentage of people who wanted to share their data was the same as before the pandemic. So in fact, so it's less than 50%. We're talking about a minority who shared their data. So this is a big problem. There's a lot of money wasted and a lot of human life lost. It's a moral issue. We don't share because what's in it for us, you know? Some, of course, do share, but there are many who do not share, they don't want to share. So don't we have a problem there? You know, isn't there a problem with our reward and incentive system? There's something that we are not doing right. There's something that we're doing wrong in terms of evaluations, clearly. What you're saying is quite impressive, actually. Yes, Déborah Chery? Yes, just to follow on from that, it seems, I think, that Claire Giry answered this question at the beginning. I think it was in February. I think it was the 4th or 5th of February. I don't remember the exact date. Okay, it was the 4th. 4th of February, all right. When she spoke on that day, and she said that she was very surprised because the rate of people who use open science has not really evolved since the pandemic. And I can add that this is probably related to the fact that articles were withdrawn. And it's interesting to establish a connection between that and scientific integrity. And someone talked a little bit about artificial intelligence earlier in the day. And there's a lot more being said about artificial intelligence. I first wanted to say Thank you. Thank you, because for once, young researchers actually have a place. Thank you to HCRS for speaking to us today. So I just want to say thank you, muchas gracias. And because I'm from Martinique myself, I'm going to self a bel merci because it's really important to me. Sorry, you speak Italian? Because we've got some Italians here in the room. Grazie mille, grazie mille. That's all right. So also in Dutch, dank u wel. I just wanted to say that there is the issue of open science. The definition of young researchers in France, that's an interesting definition. Young researcher, that is someone who does a doctorate in France and who also already has the doctorate. So it's interesting to see that there's young researcher, but the definitions are actually different from one country to another. So we may need to rethink that. In terms of flexibility, this is an open question because societal challenges every day, some people were talking about the definition of universitas in the medieval times and the Middle Ages, universities coming from the community, but the societal challenge of university. For all time, we've basically asked ourselves the question, what is the university? What does it involve and entail? So in terms of mobility is an issue we need to think or rethink, because flexibility that gives rise to mobility as well. Mobility can be virtual. We saw that with the pandemic, but mobility is also geographic. So it will give rise to the legal framework, to the, and there are people, and in universities, people are going to be testing what is going to be the impact on the mental health of young researchers, students, young researchers, all of these people who have had to go through this pandemic situation. How do they establish criteria to be able to choose? We talked about European universities this morning, and that's maybe part of the answer. Could that be an answer for you? Well, it is the beginning of the answer, I think, because we are moving towards more alliances among universities and higher education institutions. From a geographical viewpoint, I am in Martinique, or in the French Caribbean islands. So will my friends be able to come to see me more easily? This can also be a question. I'm also a scientist. I also work. How are people going to come and see me later? That's just my personal thought. We might try to answer all these questions because you had a whole list of questions actually that young researchers and doctoral fellows are asking themselves. You talked about European universities, university alliances. How can we answer all of this without, going too far astray from our initial theme? Yes, Deborah was talking from the viewpoint of young researchers, and I would say that the problems, the issues that we're discussing today at this roundtable is not just young researchers. It's people in the middle of their careers, end of career, even have the same problems. The life of a researcher, 40 years at least of professional life, we evolve a lot over our careers. And researchers who today are older, they have seen the entire development really of systems today, and they are also basically stuck in a system, perhaps. And so that's why we want to defend this open aspect, this open approach. It's for everyone, all researchers, the entire scientific community, in fact. And as far as I'm concerned, of course, you have young researchers who need particular support. They need more support than those who are more experienced and who are already in the system. But we come back to the fundamental aspects, the values, the place of each researcher within the system, irrespective of the age of that researcher. Perhaps you have some ideas of proposals, or maybe some proposals that you have made for improvements of activities related to Science Europe. Well, just some examples, perhaps. We have suggested some examples. In 2020, we suggested different ways of broadening our approach. We talked about peer evaluation. We proposed, in fact, making that group of peers larger. You know, sometimes peers are underused and we don't use all the people we could use, and then the same people are used many times. And this is also a problem for those who are actually asked to undertake peer review. So what we want to do is open it to a broader base, and also open to younger researchers, to make younger researchers more involved, to actually make them stakeholders and part of the approach, and to give them opportunities to gain experience. There are other proposals that we have made. For example, the pilot projects. You know, researchers are often afraid of a new system. You know, they go, will the new system be better or worse than the existing system? You know, so maybe some pilot phases to be able to test the new system and to see whether a system or another system is better or more compatible. That's at the level of Science Europe. But with the Commission and the European University Association as well, to develop a number of trade-offs or compromises, if you will. And here we are already working on a number of ideas. I don't know, Kostas, if you want to mention some of the principles in your study from last year. Yes, Kostas?
And Thierry Coulon actually summed up everything and said what was really essential. So we have to look at the different products of research, not only publications. So data is very important as well, as I said before. And I'm thinking of COVID, and if on January the 11th, the Chinese gentleman and the Australian gentleman published the genome of the virus, of course, it's that has to be rewarded, because it's even worth more than any article in any journal. We have to be careful with the indicators that are not reflective of quality. Those are lazy indicators. They're no real reflection of quality of the research. So we have to base ourselves on a more qualitative system, as we've said before, but backed by some indicators still. But we have to make a responsible use of these indicators, not a blind use. And in the end, include and factor in the diversity of languages, cultures, stages in the career, in the evaluation system. And all of this, you know, it's not that we've developed it and we put it on a plate for you to use. It's still to be engineered, but we have to do it all together. And that's what the difficulty, but it's also the beauty of it, because we need to work across countries and across cultures and across the type of organizations, because financing organizations, research institutions, research evaluation agencies, we have to have consistency. So it's not we offered it to you on a plate, but rather let's do it all together, and operators as well as financing partners. Stephen Cury, we're still discussing proposals. Maybe there are suggestions or proposals in the audience or even online, but Stephen Cury, about proposals. So we've heard a few. I'm sure you have others for us.
Well, I mean, I agree with what what Kostas has just said about the having to work with the, having to engineer this process and having to operationalize a view of how one develops a more robust system of research assessment. It isn't something, I think there is. We've discussed that, different countries have different standards and different approaches. In the previous session, we had some discussion of that. But actually, I think there is quite a good degree of international agreement about what a healthy scientific or research ecosystem looks like, and a shared understanding of, the problems that are preventing us from getting that. I mean, it was interesting, Kostas said, the publication of the SARS genome on January the 11th, that should be rewarded. In fact, what happened was that the Chinese scientist was punished. His lab was closed down temporarily by the authorities in Beijing because unofficial information had been leaked, and it had actually interfered with the process of actually getting a Nature paper out of the sequence. And so that just shows you how our system of research assessment, which relies still too heavily on published papers, on inadvisable metrics like the impact factor, is working against the public good. And it very much is a moral issue there. And I agree that we do need a more structured approach that recognizes the different qualities of research. The question came up earlier about, how does one measure the quality of research? And it's a bit of a non-question, even though I asked it, because, research isn't just one thing. And I think what we really need to think about are the qualities, plural, of research. And yes, we absolutely want to recognize, brilliant ideas and well-designed experiments, but we need also to recognize, scientific rigor and integrity. We need to recognize the fact that people have demonstrated that they will share their results and their data and their source code routinely. And I think actually one of the main actors that can help to push in this direction and change behavior are research funders. And again, I think there is a broad international view about this. I was at a meeting of the Global Research Council, which has representatives of all the national funders from around the world. And this was actually there were two meetings in November 2020 and May 2021. And there was a paper there which was discussed, which was showing how research funders can help to, use the power that they have, because they have the money, to move the levers on culture and on what it is that we value. And we've seen the power of that in the UK. So I read out the numbers to begin with, and the UK has the most signatories of Dora. And among the 235, there are about 80 universities, which is about half of the universities in the UK. And I think that's driven partly by a policy adopted by the Wellcome Trust, which is a major funder of biomedical research. And they will not fund researchers unless the institution has either signed Dora or demonstrated that they are trying to implement the principles of Dora. And so that is one way in which funders can actually drive the adoption of new policies and new standards. And yes, we do need to think about, the qualities that we want to agree, but I think there is a common set that we can agree.
Yeah, Stefan, maybe we have short time remaining, but maybe you have time to tell us about the narrative curriculum vitae. I know that is a topic you want that Dora would implement, and that's interesting. Could you say a few words about it?
Yes, a little bit.
As part of your proposal. Yeah.
So the narrative CV is actually a way of trying to capture in a structured and concise way the different qualities of a researcher's activity. So clearly one is interested in the quality of the research that they do. Is it groundbreaking? Has it helped move the field along? Is it important for the discipline? But also one can capture other aspects of research, like, what's the worldwide impact of that has been? Has it led to new therapies, for example? And clearly a lot of work around SARS has already led to, vaccine development, for example. One can talk about one's commitment to open science, your commitment to mentorship, how have you developed the careers of the PhD students and postdocs in your laboratory, or your contributions to, social policy. And so the idea of the narrative CV, I have heard it dismissed rather disparagingly as, just stories. And people criticize it because they say, well, you will end up funding just the people who are the best writers. But the narrative CV is a way of asking the same questions. And so it's a way of structuring qualitative information, which makes comparison easier. And I think if you enforce a concise form, then that also means that you are being mindful of the workload that one is asking evaluators, reviewers to undertake. It's not a silver bullet. There's lots of funding agencies already experimenting with it, and it definitely needs to be stressed and road tested. And I know there are already efforts going in that direction, and Dora is very supportive of that. But I do think it is a promising mechanism for trying to bring to reality the types of evaluation that I think that we need.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. Je n'avais pas certaines questions là sur l'iPad qu'on m'avait laissé, mais en voici.
Well, here are new questions that I find interesting. In France, are the scientific integrity contact points the right ones to give the support that Déborah Chery mentioned, and are there equivalents in other countries? So are there equivalents in other countries, maybe for you? Scientific integrity contact points, there are several, yes. And could they help with giving support to young researchers that Deborah mentioned? Well, about research integrity, I would say that a majority of research institutes have codes of integrity. So the code is there. The application of these codes is something different. So the question is not whether these codes exist, codes of conduct, but how they are implemented. So we're a step further. We're not currently developing codes of conduct or codes of scientific integrity. So we're not inventing integrity.
Le premier point, c'est que la France était terriblement en retard dans le domaine de l'intégrité scientifique.
About France, I have to say that we were running behind in terms of scientific integrity. Thierry Bourdon is the one that gave the impetus at the end of the previous presidential term by setting up the French Office for Scientific Integrity that is hosted by HCRS. What is important is to be in the field in research institutes, and over the last few years in universities, the fact that we've appointed scientific integrity contact points. But these contact points have a different job to do, because they have to deal with cases that are often delicate. So they do a lot more than support. And then there's another question, and that's why when you're a doctoral student, you actually, there's an oath. So it's a larger question. Yes, Déborah Chery, and then I have one last question before we wrap up. Training in scientific integrity, I'm not speaking on behalf of Eurodoc, I'm speaking for myself. In France, we realize that we need to talk about open science and publication more and more. There's a real need in the field. And doctoral students or young doctors, young researchers, they ask, how can I do this? And it is imposed on them as part of the funding to keep their research open. Just a few more questions before we wrap up. Questions for all of you, and Stephen Cury can also answer. It's more of an observation. Quantitative and qualitative evaluation of research. Is there a real contradiction between the two? I imagine that you're all going to say no, or to a certain extent, or in different ways. Stephen Cury.
No, there isn't, and I think there is a demand from most researchers for both, and for a balance between them. I think where we are at the minute, the fear is that the balance has swung too far towards quantitative indicators, which are relatively crude, and there are ones which are used widely that are not appropriate, like the impact factor, like the H-index as well. And, university league tables are yet another problem that we have with over-metricization. But even so, then, the idea of introducing the narrative CV, for example, provides a more structured way of providing qualitative information, but it would be important also, I think, that people are allowed to add quantitative information. So demonstrating productivity, talking about citations in a context-sensitive way, I think that is all perfectly reasonable. The research community very much wants evidence of research performance, and I think it's quite reasonable to ask for that.
Merci beaucoup, Stéphane, pour vos réponses.
Thank you very much.